Captain Midnight.
The second Joker movie is pretty fascinating. It's a character study with almost nothing new to say about its lead character. It's a musical where the songs rarely lead to any interesting musical set pieces, often sung by a lead who, at least in this role, can't really sing. It's a courtroom drama with an incredibly twist-free, cut-and-dry case at its center. It's a twisted romance where the leads have almost no romantic chemistry. And it's a Joker movie without any of the things people have historically enjoyed about the Joker. I think doing just one of those things well would have gone a long way, especially when you consider that the movie, with a shout out to cinematographer Lauren Scher, looks pretty great. But as it stands, this was a rough sit, not without its worthwhile scenes, moments, and images, but disastrous as a coherent whole. Before I get into that, I should say there will be spoilers. Also, I'd really love to hit that 680k subscriber count, so click that subscribe button. Let's start with that character bit I mentioned. The first Joker movie was always going to be difficult to make a sequel to, because it's hard to imagine that character going much of anywhere after the events of the first film. Arthur Fleck was never a genius. There was no method to his madness beyond his pain and his violent impulses. He is not, in other words, a character that you can put any kind of traditional Batman-esque story around and have him play the role that the Joker usually does. He's not the clown prince of crime. He's a very sad, abused man lashing out at the world without any kind of grand plan. This movie is well aware of that and leans into it. Boy, does it ever. And I don't think what it comes up with will satisfy many viewers. Arthur Fleck is at the center of this story, but he rarely makes any really active choices in it. Whether it's being led around Arkham, being told what he needs to do by his defense attorney, or being manipulated by Harley Quinn, Arthur himself rarely has much agency. The most shocking moments in the movie, the courthouse explosion and Arthur's death, are both executed by people almost entirely outside of the actual narrative, making important choices off-screen, presumably as we watch Arthur sing into a telephone. Now, there's a case to be made that that's very purposeful, that Arthur has come to represent something much bigger than himself, something he's not fully comfortable with. This idea seems to be what director Todd Phillips had in mind, saying about Arthur, quote, "He's never been this Joker that's been put upon him, this idea that Gotham people put upon him, that he represents. He's an unwitting icon." And honestly, I think it's this, maybe even more so than the poorly received musical numbers, that has people so frustrated with this movie. Because, I'm sorry, this just feels wildly untrue from a dramatic standpoint. It's a sloppy retcon that completely defangs the climax of the last movie. Like, okay, let me do a shaky comparison here. And spoilers for the first Godfather movie, I guess. You've had a while to watch it. But alright, imagine if the Godfather Part 2 came out, and we discover that actually, Michael Corleone wasn't fully sure about his choice to settle all family business the day of his nephew's baptism. He actually got talked into it. He's really uncomfortable with what he did, and he starts the second movie very unsure if he wants to be the Don of the Corleone family at all, despite the first film's ending. That would be a betrayal of the dramatic tension that The Godfather created and where Michael's story led him dramatically. Michael crossed that threshold. He did something truly brutal, and he did it on purpose. Arthur Fleck also makes clear in the first Joker movie that he embraces the Joker persona. He asks Murray to call him by that name instead of his own, and then he executes him. Now the second movie tries to go back on that. He's unsure of how much he wants to embrace its impact. It feels cheap, and it leaves the movie completely rudderless. Now, I want to make clear, this comparison wasn't meant to be one-to-one or anything. I'm not saying Arthur should have come out in this movie and suddenly been a Michael-like criminal genius. That's not who Arthur is. But to rob him entirely of his conviction, of his disturbing anger and impulsive drive, is to completely cop out on what the ending of that first movie was. I didn't need a sequel to Joker, but I especially didn't need one that isn't even comfortable reckoning with its own lead character. For all this movie's attempts to come off as edgy or controversial, I think this choice builds the film on a foundation of dramatic cowardice. They ended Joker in a very disturbing and uncomfortable place, and here it feels like they didn't even want to deal with the character that they had created, the one born out of those events. If they wanted to have Arthur slowly discover that he hates and fears this mob of support that grew around him, that's fine, but you need to build to that, justify that turn, and I don't think this movie did. But alright, let's address the elephant in the room a little more, the musical aspect. Todd Phillips seemed really hesitant to fully embrace calling this a musical, but make no mistake, it definitely is, and I've seen it take a lot of heat for that fact alone. Personally, I don't have anything against musicals. I love classic Hollywood, and while I haven't explored musicals nearly as much as, say, westerns, I do think that comes with at least some appreciation for them. Singin' in the Rain, Top Hat, West Side Story. These are movies that I care about. I also like Frank Sinatra and watching clips from old 70s variety shows. So if anything, I thought I was teed up to go against the grain here and really stick up for this odd choice. But yeah, that's not going to happen. Despite the best efforts of Lady Gaga, this movie completely fails as a musical in a few very important ways. One, and the most basic, is that Joaquin Phoenix is very unpleasant to listen to here. Now, his voice captured a solid Johnny Cash impression in Walk the Line, but as Arthur Fleck, he does a lot of really intense, quiet singing. You know, like when a musical number will start with one guy singing a little bit in this hushed, somber tone before it breaks out into a bigger number. It's kind of like that, but if the bigger numbers just never really arrived. I know for a lot of people, when a character spontaneously breaks into song, that is the biggest barrier for them with musicals. They just can't get on board. And that happens a lot here. But then, usually the pleasure of a musical is that it leads to some impressive showmanship. Once that reality is pierced, you can really bend the world around the character's emotions, with dancers, backup singers, and show-stopping solos. Most of the time, though, that just doesn't happen here. It's often just one person almost mumble singing an old pop song by themselves. If you're gonna do musical numbers, this seems like the most off-putting way to do it. Like, you have the part of the musical that people who hate musicals really hate, the spontaneous singing, but with very little of the stuff that people who love musicals really love. It's a strange middle ground to put yourself in. Now, there are these dreamlike courtroom and variety show segments, and these are easily the best musical numbers in the film. They're more driven by Lady Gaga's talent and are far more visually interesting, but I don't think they really go far enough to truly stand out. I was actually kind of surprised overall by how tame they are. They also bring the pacing of the film to a crashing halt, as the movie doesn't meaningfully connect them back to the narrative nearly well enough. With one exception, I think it would be very easy to just carve these out and not even miss them. Then there's the courtroom drama, and this is really frustrating because I feel like it's very difficult to screw up courtroom dramas with actors this compelling. Like, it wasn't difficult for me to picture a Joker sequel handling this stuff well, but it doesn't. Arthur's defense attorney is a very nice woman who seems to mean well and have his best interest at heart. And that's kind of it. There's nothing more to this character, which is frustrating when she is the one steering Arthur's course of action for so much of the film. Then when he falls under the influence of Harley Quinn and starts to defend himself, it at least looked like we were finally going to get something exciting and strange to inject some life back into this thing. Only for Arthur's defense of himself to also be really underwhelming. Now, I did enjoy the scene with Gary. Lee Gill really kills it here, wringing every drop of emotion out of this screenplay. Honestly, I would love to see that actor pop up in more projects. And if the scene between Joker and Gary was released as like a standalone short film, I'd be pretty impressed. But I think that is absolutely as far as I can go, praising the courtroom drama material in this movie. Arthur's Joker is just painfully uninteresting in these scenes. Phoenix goes for some off-the-wall wackiness with a very broad Southern gentleman accent, but it doesn't go anywhere. He has no plan here. nothing interesting to say. Honestly, he makes less of a nuisance of himself in front of the judge than like Jimmy McGill in any given Better Call Saul episode. Now I understand that to a large extent, this is on purpose. Arthur is playing pretend. He has nowhere else to go with this character he created. He's fumbling around, trying to live up to this expectation that Quinn and his admirers have for him. I don't find that to be a very interesting choice. We've seen the first movie. We know that Arthur is capable of being truly deranged and not just play acting at it. Instead, we're watching him just kind of flail around and fail at it. I'm sure some will find this to be an interesting dramatic choice, and I can see the argument. But I also can't really blame an audience for showing up to a movie with Joker in the title and wanting to see the Joker be the Joker, at least for a few minutes. And if you're gonna take that off the table, you better replace it with something pretty damn compelling. I don't think this movie manages that. It also doesn't help that we don't care about anyone else involved in this case. The judge is a generic tough guy judge who won't suffer any hijinks in his court, except, all the times when he does. And Harvey Dent is literally only notable for having the name Harvey Dent. Replace his character name with Smug DA number 1 and nothing changes. I should probably talk about Harley Quinn and Arthur's relationship, but honestly, I just found a lot less to say about it than I expected. There's so little ambiguity here, so little actual tension or chemistry. The sequence where she started the fire I thought was interesting, but it drops off a cliff once Arthur's lawyer makes it clear that she's been lying to him about most things, and she's basically just a bored rich woman with a psych background. That information and reveal, I think, could have been doled out to us in a heart-wrenchingly emotional fashion, ripping Arthur's trust for her away at a moment with a lot of dramatic stakes. Instead, it's just kind of casually tossed out there, and her long-term scheming amounts to very little. So let's just get into the last 20 or so minutes of this movie. What happens to Arthur at the hands of the guards feels incredibly out of left field. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail here because I don't want to be demonetized, but we all know what's being heavily implied. I don't think this movie actually has much to say on that topic. I mean, it was surprising. If that was Philip's goal, mission accomplished, but I can't say it's a choice that I have much respect for. Now the courtroom explosion, that perked me up in my seat a little bit. Arthur escapes and falls into a car with two guys who absolutely love Joker, only to flee from them as soon as he can. I think this really could have worked, but the Joker fan club, beyond Harley, is just incredibly thinly sketched in this movie. We see people who love the Joker in the background quite a bit in this film, but they're a concept more than actual people. Like these two guys in the car, they're not characters. We don't know why they love the Joker or why they've come to identify with him so much. Do they have similar backgrounds to Arthur, or are they LARPing rich kids? Maybe something in between? The movie doesn't seem to care, and it wouldn't be a huge deal except that they built the third act of this movie around Arthur rejecting the Joker persona and all it represents to these people. And I think that's an incredibly boring choice when the movie never clearly articulates what that is and only vaguely gestures at it. Now this all culminates in Arthur being stabbed by a man who is heavily implied to become the real Heath Ledger-like Joker. And again, in a different context, I think this could have worked great. If I squint, I can see this movie being about Arthur and Harley embracing their roles as leaders of this new unruly social force, turning up the temperature on the court and the prison system, fomenting building chaos across Gotham through this movement that Arthur has never totally controlled or was smart enough to really plan for, only for this Joker to emerge from it. Someone who can ruthlessly and effectively harness what people responded to in Arthur's Joker to his own ends. That's disturbing and I think a pretty interesting idea, but that's not what this movie is. Again, these Joker fanatics are such non-entities in the film that there's very little dramatic irony to this death, like there would be in the kind of grim 70s film these movies so desperately want to ape. This new Joker feels more like an Easter egg, no more motivated by the story itself than the one tacked on to the end of the Batman. Also, I never finished it, but isn't this basically what Gotham on Fox did? I guess it's mildly surprising, but it's not that interesting, and I feel like that's a sentence I could find myself saying about this movie quite a bit. Leaving this one, I was left thinking of a line from a song. A song, maybe fittingly, from the exact era this movie is so obsessed with pulling from. Is that all there is? Between the Joker movies, the Pattinson Batman, and the upcoming Brave and the Bold, it's pretty easy to confuse what exactly DC is doing here. It definitely has that in common with the old Fox X-Men films. And if you're a Nebula member, you can watch Lindsay Ellis break that down in detail for over 90 minutes. It's really entertaining stuff, and yet another sign of how Nebula continues to up their originals game. Nebula is a boutique streaming service where you can watch all my videos plus a few exclusive ones, totally ad-free. Not to mention videos by Tierzu, Be Kind Rewind, Nando V Movies, and Patrick H. Willems. They're all there alongside so many others. Nebula has put in a ton of effort over the years to become a prestige streaming service for viewers and creators, and it just continues to get better and better. So don't miss it. Get a yearly Nebula subscription for 40% off at go.nebula.tv/captainmidnight right now. Check out that link in the description or pinned comment below.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started, because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes too.